The world tilted on a fractured axis, the vibrant colors of the market stalls bleeding into a sickening gray smear. One moment, my hand was outstretched, trembling, toward a bruised apple I couldn't afford. The next, the cobblestones rushed up to meet me. The scent of cinnamon and sawdust, the raucous laughter of the merchants, the very air in my lungs, it all vanished, sucked into a black, roaring void. There was no thought, no fear, only the final, crushing weight of emptiness as my body gave out, a silent surrender to the hunger that had gnawed at my bones for days. Consciousness dissolved, but not before a final phantom sensation. Strong arms scooping me from the dirt, a startling warmth that felt like lightning against my cold skin, and a scent like petrichor and pine, a storm breaking in a silent forest. Wait, before the next revelation unfolds, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected claims, broken bonds, or awakenings under the moon, subscribe and stay close. Now, back to the scene. I woke to the gentle crackle of a fireplace. The scent of pine was stronger here, mingling with the clean, crisp smell of laundered cotton and savory herbs. I was lying on a soft bed, tucked beneath a heavy quilt that felt like a mountain of impossible luxury. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through the fog in my head. Where was I? Who had brought me here? Kidnapped? Sold? My mind, sluggish from starvation, scrambled for answers, each one more terrifying than the last. I pushed myself up on weak elbows, my muscles screaming in protest. The room was simple, rustic. The walls were made of dark, sturdy logs, the floor of polished wood planks. A small, neatly set table stood near the fire, holding a steaming bowl of stew, a thick slice of bread, and a pitcher of water. My stomach clenched with a painful, desperate cramp at the sight of it. It was more food than I had seen in a week. A shadow detached itself from the corner of the room. I flinched, pulling the quilt up to my chin. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, his presence filling the small space with a quiet, intimidating energy. He was the source of the storm and pine scent that clung to my memory. He wore simple, dark clothing, and his face was a mask of stoic neutrality, his jawline sharp, his dark hair slightly disheveled. But it was his eyes that held me captive, a piercing shade of gray, like a winter sky heavy with unshed snow. They watched me, not with malice, but with a still, unnerving intensity. He didn't speak. He simply gestured with his head toward the table. An invitation? A command? I didn't know which. My fear warred with the gnawing agony in my belly. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get away from this powerful, silent stranger. But my body was a traitor, my legs felt like water, and the aroma of the stew was a siren's call. Swallowing hard, I slid my legs over the side of the bed. The clothes I wore weren't my own ragged dress, but a soft, oversized tunic that smelled of him. The intimacy of it sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I shuffled to the table, my eyes darting between the man and the food, ready to bolt at the slightest aggressive move. He remained perfectly still, a sentinel in the shadows, his gaze never leaving me. I sat down, my hands shaking so badly I could barely lift the spoon. The first mouthful of stew was heaven. Rich, hot broth, tender chunks of meat, and soft vegetables flooded my senses, and I nearly wept with relief. I devoured it, not caring how pathetic I looked, my hunger a wild animal that had finally been fed. I ate the bread, drank the water, and only when the bowl was scraped clean did I dare to look at him again. He was still watching me, his expression unchanged. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice a rusty croak. He gave a slow, single nod. No words, not a flicker of a smile or a frown. Just that unwavering, silent observation. It was more unsettling than any threat. Who was this man who would carry a collapsed beggar from the street and feed her in utter silence? "Where am I?" I asked, a little stronger this time. He walked over to the door, opened it, and looked out into the twilight before turning his gaze back to me. He pointed a finger at his own chest, then swept his arm in an arc, indicating the cottage and the land beyond. Mine. The gesture was clear. "Why?" I pressed, my courage fueled by the warmth in my stomach. "Why did you help me?" For the first time, something shifted in his granite expression. A flicker of something complex, pain, frustration, something else I couldn't name, passed through his eyes. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but then closed it again, his jaw tightening. He turned away from me and stared into the fire, his broad back a solid wall between us. The conversation, if it could even be called that, was over. I stayed for 3 days. Each day was the same. I would wake to find food on the table. He would be gone, but the scent of him lingered. He returned at dusk, taking his place in the corner chair, watching me eat, watching the fire. He never spoke a single word. I tried asking questions, telling him my name was Ilara, trying to fill the oppressive silence with the sound of my own voice, but he never responded. The fear began to recede, replaced by a profound and unnerving curiosity. And something else, a pull. When he was near, the air buzzed with a strange energy. My skin tingled, and I felt a bizarre sense of recognition. It was a dangerous feeling. I knew what kind of power existed in these deep woods on the edges of civilized lands. Shifters, packs, alphas. I was a human, an orphan with nothing to my name. If this was pack territory, I was trespassing. A silent man was the least of my worries. On the 4th night, I decided I had to leave. I was stronger now. I couldn't accept his charity, his unnerving silence, any longer. It felt like a cage, however comfortable. I waited until the fire had burned down to embers, and his breathing had deepened into the slow, steady rhythm of sleep where he sat in his chair. I slipped out of the bed, my bare feet silent on the wood floor. I found my old, tattered dress, washed and folded, by the door. As I changed, my fingers brushed against a strange mark on my wrist, a faint, silvery swirl that looked like a crescent moon. I didn't remember having it before. Shaking my head, I dismissed it, a trick of the firelight. My hand was on the door latch when a floorboard creaked behind me. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. I turned slowly. He was standing, no longer in the shadows, but fully illuminated by the moonlight pouring through the single window. And I saw it, the raw, untamed power that radiated from him, the sheer dominance. This was no mere man. This was an alpha. My blood ran cold. I had been sleeping under the roof of one of the most dangerous creatures known to my kind. He took a step toward me, his gray eyes blazing with an emotion I finally recognized: desperation. He shook his head slowly, a clear plea for me to stay. "I can't," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I don't belong here." He reached out, his hand hovering in the air between us, not quite touching me. It was a gesture of such profound longing that it stole the breath from my lungs. The pull I'd felt intensified, a tangible cord tightening in my chest, drawing me toward him. My mind screamed danger, but my soul whispered home. It was a terrifying, impossible contradiction. He was an alpha, a shifter. I was human. There was no us in this world. Such a thing was forbidden, a fairy tale that ended in bloodshed. A deep growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of pure frustration. He gestured again, more forcefully this time, toward the bed. Stay. I shook my head, tears welling in my eyes. Who are you? I begged. Please, just tell me who you are. His face contorted in a mask of agony. He struck his own throat lightly with the side of his hand, a sharp, angry motion. And then I understood. It wasn't that he wouldn't speak. It was that he couldn't. The revelation struck me with the force of a physical blow. This powerful, intimidating alpha was mute. The silence wasn't a choice, it was a prison. And in that moment, my fear was eclipsed by a wave of heart-wrenching empathy. My own lonely existence suddenly felt mirrored in his silent one. But empathy couldn't change the facts. I was a human in an alpha's den, a lamb sleeping beside a wolf. Whatever his reasons for bringing me here, my continued presence put me, and possibly him, in grave danger. With a sob, I turned and wrenched the door open, fleeing into the cold, dark woods, leaving the silent alpha standing alone in the moonlight. The forest was a terrifying maze of shadows and unseen things. My bare feet stumbled over roots and sharp stones, but I didn't stop. I ran with the wild, desperate energy of a cornered animal. The silent alpha's anguished face was burned into my mind. The pull toward him was a physical ache, a tearing sensation in my chest, as if a part of me was being left behind. I didn't know how long I ran, only that my lungs were burning and my legs were numb when I finally collapsed at the base of an ancient oak tree. I huddled there, shivering, listening to the sounds of the night. A wolf howled in the distance, a lonely, mournful sound that echoed the emptiness inside me. Was it him? The next few days were a blur of misery that made my time starving in the market seem pleasant. I tried to find my way back to the town, but the woods were vast and disorienting. I ate berries that made my stomach cramp and drank from streams, the constant fear of predators a knot in my gut. The next few days were a blur of misery that made my time starving in the market seem pleasant. I tried to find my way back to the town, but the woods were vast and disorienting. I ate berries that made my stomach cramp and drank from streams, the constant fear of predators a knot in my gut. I was weak again, the strength his food had given me quickly draining away. One evening, huddled in a makeshift shelter of fallen branches, I heard a twig snap nearby. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Peeking through a gap, I saw them. Two large, grizzled men with the hard eyes and restless energy of shifters. They weren't from the town. Rogues. My blood turned to ice. Rogues were lawless, cast out from their packs for a reason. They were scavengers, and I was easy prey. "Smell that, Marcus," one of them growled, his voice a low rumble. "Human, female." "Lost little thing," the other chuckled, a cruel, predatory sound. "The alpha will have our hides if we take pack-claimed territory prey." "What alpha? Old mute Kalen? He hasn't spoken a word in 10 years. Barely an alpha. Besides, she's on the border. Fair game." Kalen? So that was his name. The insult, old mute Kalen, sent a surprising spike of anger through my fear. They saw his silence as weakness. I, who had seen the raw power and profound emotion in his eyes, knew they were wrong. They were getting closer, their heavy boots crunching on the forest floor. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for an escape I knew wouldn't come. This was it. This was how I would die. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl ripped through the clearing, a sound so full of fury and dominance that the very ground seemed to vibrate. It was a sound that promised death. The two rogues froze, their arrogant smirks wiped from their faces. From the shadows, a massive black wolf emerged. It was larger than any wolf I had ever imagined. Its fur the color of midnight, its eyes glowing with a faint silvery light. It moved with a lethal grace, a phantom of muscle and teeth. There was no question who it was. Kalen. He placed himself directly between me and the rogues, his body a living shield. He didn't snarl or bark. He was utterly silent, but his stillness was more menacing than any sound. The air crackled with his power, a suffocating pressure that demanded submission. "Alpha Kalen," Marcus stammered, taking a step back. We didn't know she was yours." Kalen took a slow, deliberate step forward. The rogues scrambled backward, their bravado gone, replaced by primal fear. He was their superior in every way, and they knew it. With another threatening step, he sent them fleeing into the woods like startled deer. He stood there for a long moment, his powerful form silhouetted against the moon, ensuring the threat was gone. Then he turned to me. The silver glow in his eyes softened as he looked at my huddled, trembling form. He took a hesitant step closer, then another. He wasn't a monster. He was a protector. My protector. He nudged my hand with his wet nose, a surprisingly gentle touch. The connection between us flared, stronger than ever. In his wolf form, the bond was undeniable, a raw, elemental force. I could feel his emotions washing over me through it, concern, relief, and a deep, possessive anger at those who had threatened me. Slowly, shakily, I reached out and laid my hand on his head. His fur was thick and soft. He leaned into my touch, a low rumble of something like a purr vibrating through his chest. All my fear of him, of his shifter nature, melted away, replaced by a profound sense of safety. He nudged me again, more insistently this time, toward the direction of his cottage. The message was clear: come home. This time, I didn't run. I walked beside him, my hand resting on his back, my protector, my silent alpha. When we arrived back at the cottage, he nudged the door open and waited for me to go inside. Once I was safe by the fire, he disappeared back into the woods. He returned a few minutes later as a man, fully clothed, his gray eyes searching my face for any sign of fear. I offered him a small, watery smile. "Kalen," I said, testing his name on my tongue. A look of pure astonishment crossed his face. He nodded, a sharp, quick gesture, his eyes wide. He hadn't expected me to know it. He sat in his usual chair, but the dynamic between us had irrevocably changed. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was comfortable, filled with a new understanding. I had seen his wolf, his power, and his vulnerability, and I was still here. He had saved my life. Over the next few weeks, a strange, quiet routine developed. I stayed, and he cared for me. I learned to read his moods in the subtle shifts of his expression, the tension in his shoulders, the light in his eyes. I learned that a slight tilt of his head was a question, a soft sigh meant contentment, and a clenched jaw meant he was troubled. We built a language without words. I, in turn, filled the silence. I told him stories of my life as an orphan, of the struggles, the small joys, the loneliness. I talked about my dreams, dreams I hadn't let myself have in years. He would listen, his gaze unwavering, and I felt more heard by him than by anyone who had ever spoken to me. The pull between us grew, a constant humming current beneath the surface of our quiet lives. Sometimes he would reach out, as if to touch my cheek or brush a stray hair from my face, only to pull back at the last second, his jaw tight with restraint. I yearned for his touch with an intensity that frightened me. I was falling for a man who couldn't speak my name, a shifter alpha whose world I had no right to be in. The pack, however, was not as accepting of our silent arrangement. A delegation led by a stern, silver-haired wolf named Riss appeared at our door one afternoon. Kalen was out, likely hunting. "The human has been here long enough," Riss said without preamble, his eyes cold and assessing. "The pack is unsettled. They whisper that the alpha has taken a pet, a human mate. It's an abomination." "I'm not his pet," I said, my voice shaking but firm. I stood taller, refusing to be intimidated. "And I'm not his mate. That's impossible." "Is it?" Riss sneered. "We all feel the shift in his power, the way he is settled. It's the mate bond. But you are human, a weakness, a liability. You will bring ruin to this pack." "He saved my life," I retorted. "He's a good man." "He is an alpha, responsible for the lives of every shifter in this territory," Riss shot back. "His personal feelings are irrelevant. You will leave by tomorrow's sunrise. If you do not, we will remove you." The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp. They left, and I sank into a chair, my heart pounding. Riss was right. My presence here was dangerous. I was a distraction, a weakness. For the good of the pack, for Kalen's own safety as its leader, I had to leave. The thought was a physical pain, a tearing at the bond that had formed between us. Loving him meant leaving him. When Kalen returned, he knew instantly that something was wrong. He saw the tracks outside, the fear in my eyes. He walked over to me, his expression a storm of questions. I couldn't bear to see the pain in his eyes when I told him I had to go. So instead of explaining, I did the only thing I could think of. I stood on my tiptoes, cupped his face in my hands, and pressed my lips against his. For a moment, he was completely still, a statue of shocked surprise. Then a shudder ran through his powerful frame. A low groan, the first sound I had ever heard him make besides that one growl, escaped his lips. His arms came around me, pulling me flush against his hard body, and he kissed me back with a desperate, pent-up passion that had been simmering for weeks. The kiss was everything he couldn't say. It was full of longing, of tenderness, of a fierce possessiveness that staked a claim on my very soul. The bond between us ignited, a roaring inferno of light and heat. It was terrifying and exhilarating and felt more right than anything in my life. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed, his whole body trembling. In that moment, I knew I couldn't leave him. I would face his pack. I would face the entire world to stay by his side. But the world had other plans. A piercing howl of alarm cut through the evening air. An attack. Kalen stiffened, his head snapping up. The tenderness in his eyes was replaced by the cold, hard steel of an alpha at war. He looked at me, a silent promise in his gaze. Stay here, stay safe. And then he was gone, melting into the woods to defend his pack. I waited, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I paced the small cottage, praying to a goddess I wasn't sure I believed in. Hours passed. The sounds of fighting faded, but he didn't return. As the moon climbed to its zenith, a strange, agonizing pain seized me. It started in my bones, a deep, grinding ache that made me cry out. My skin felt too tight, my muscles twisting into excruciating knots. I fell to the floor, convulsing, my vision blurring. What was happening to me? Was it poison? A sickness? The pain intensified, white-hot and blinding. My back arched, and a scream was torn from my throat, but it sounded wrong, guttural, animalistic. I felt my bones shifting, cracking, reforming into a new, unfamiliar shape. My senses exploded. I could smell the damp earth outside, hear the frantic heartbeat of a mouse under the floorboards, see every dust mote dancing in the moonlight. The agony was unbearable, but through it, a shocking realization dawned. The silvery mark on my wrist burned with a cold fire. The impossible connection to Kalen, the way my body had hummed with energy in his presence. I wasn't human. I had never been human. I was a shifter. The transformation was violent and terrifying. I was a passenger in my own body, trapped in a storm of primal instinct. When the pain finally subsided, I was left panting on the floor, weak and disoriented. I stumbled to my feet, catching my reflection in the dark glass of the window. Staring back at me was a wolf, smaller than Kalen, with fur the color of pale silver, but a wolf nonetheless. My mind reeled. How? My parents were human, as far as I knew. I had grown up an orphan, told I was nothing, no one. Was this some dormant gene, a hidden bloodline I never knew existed? My shock gave way to a dawning, brilliant hope. This changed everything. I wasn't a liability. I wasn't an abomination. I was one of them. I was one of him. He wouldn't have to choose between me and his pack. We could truly be mates. The cottage door swung open. Kalen stood there, bloodied and exhausted from the fight. His eyes found me, and he froze. He stared at my new form, at the silver wolf trembling in the middle of his floor. I waited for the joy, the recognition, the relief. I waited for him to see me, to understand that the impossibility between us was now possible. But what I saw in his face was not joy. It was shock, a deep, profound stillness that felt colder than any rejection. His gray eyes were wide, unreadable. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. His silence, which I had learned to cherish, now felt like a judgment. He was looking at a stranger, a creature he didn't recognize. My heart, which had been soaring with hope, shattered into a million pieces. He didn't want me. He had cared for the weak human girl, the charity case. He didn't want this strange silver wolf who had appeared in his home. He was disgusted. The truth was a bitter poison. He wasn't silent because he couldn't speak. He was silent because he had nothing to say to me. A wounded, grief-stricken cry tore from my throat. Betrayal and shame washed over me. I couldn't bear the weight of his silent stare. Without a second thought, I turned and fled, bursting out the open door and into the night. I was no longer running from rogues or a pack that wouldn't accept me. I was running from him. From the alpha who held my heart and who had just rejected my very soul. The forest that had once been a source of terror was now my only refuge. My new wolf body moved with an instinct I didn't know I possessed, carrying me away from the cottage, away from Kalen's crushing silence. Each stride was fueled by heartbreak. Tears I couldn't shed in this form burned behind my eyes. I had been a fool, a naive, stupid girl who had mistaken pity for affection and a biological bond for love. He had wanted a human pet, a quiet companion to soothe his lonely existence. He had not wanted a mate, another wolf, a creature with her own power and instincts. The shock on his face had said it all. A mighty roar echoed through the trees behind me, a sound of raw anguish and fury that shook the very leaves. It was his voice, his actual voice, ripped from his throat. "Elara!" The sound was gravelly, torn, and full of a pain that mirrored my own. It stopped me dead in my tracks. He could speak. He had spoken my name. Why now? Why with such desperation? I hesitated for only a second before my shame and hurt took over again. It was a trick, a desperate attempt to lure me back. I couldn't face him. I couldn't see that look of cold shock again. I broke into a run, pushing my body faster, deeper into the wilderness. I could hear him crashing through the undergrowth behind me, his pursuit relentless. He was an alpha, stronger and faster. He would catch me easily. But I ran anyway, my pride and my pain the only fuel I had left. He cornered me in a small, moonlit clearing by a rushing river. I whirled around, baring my teeth in a snarl that was more fear than aggression. He didn't approach in his wolf form. He stood at the edge of the clearing as a man, his chest heaving, his face a mess of conflicting emotions. The silence was gone, replaced by a ragged, desperate breathing. "Don't run," he rasped, the words sounding like they were being dragged over broken glass. Each syllable seemed to cause him physical pain. I let out a low growl, circling him warily. Why was he speaking now? To tell me to leave his territory for good? "I wasn't rejecting you," he forced out, taking a pained step forward. I was stunned. I didn't believe him. I flattened my ears, my body tense. 10 years, he said, his voice cracking with the strain of disuse. For 10 years, I have not spoken. After my family was killed by rogues, they took my voice. A curse, a trauma. The pack healers couldn't fix it. The words, they wouldn't come. He touched his throat, his expression haunted. I accepted it. I would lead in silence. I would be alone. The moon goddess would not grant a mate to a broken, silent alpha. His confession hung in the air, thick with a decade of sorrow. My anger began to falter, replaced by a dawning, fragile understanding. Then I found you, he continued, his gray eyes pleading with me. Human, forbidden. But the bond, it was there. I couldn't deny it. I brought you home, knowing it was madness. I stayed silent because the words hurt, and I wanted to protect you from the pack, from the questions. I thought I could just keep you safe. He took another step, his hands held out in a gesture of peace. Tonight, when I came back from the fight, and I saw you, a wolf, my mate, not human, not forbidden, perfect. The goddess hadn't abandoned me. She had given me everything. His voice broke on the last word. The shock, it wasn't disgust, Elara. It was awe. It was a miracle. It was so much hope, after so much silence, that it stole my breath all over again. The truth of his words slammed into me, dismantling the walls I had built around my shattered heart. It wasn't rejection. It was reverence. The cold stillness hadn't been judgment. It had been a man witnessing the impossible coming true. Before I could react, before I could shift back and go to him, a blur of movement erupted from the trees. Rogues. The same pack from before, but more of them this time. Their eyes glowing with malice in the dark. They must have followed Kalen, sensing his distraction. The mute alpha found his voice. The lead rogue, a scarred brute, sneered. And his little pet learned a new trick. 2 for the price of 1. They lunged. Kalen didn't hesitate. With a roar of pure protective fury, he shifted. His transformation was nothing like my painful, chaotic one. It was instantaneous, a fluid explosion of power. One moment he was a man, the next a giant black wolf, a creature of nightmare and legend. He met their charge head-on, a whirlwind of black fur and flashing teeth. But there were too many. 3 of them swarmed him, while 2 broke off, their sights set on me. My fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp rage. They had hurt him. They had threatened my mate. A fierce, protective instinct I never knew I had rose up inside me. I was not a victim. I was not a pet. I was a wolf. I met the 2 rogues with a snarl of my own, surprising them with my ferocity. I was smaller, weaker, and inexperienced, but I fought with the desperation of someone who had finally found something worth fighting for. I snapped and dodged, my silver fur a stark contrast to their mangy brown coats. I managed to sink my teeth into one's leg, earning a yelp of pain. But the other one slammed into my side, sending me tumbling. It stood over me, jaws dripping, ready for the killing bite. Suddenly, it was thrown off of me by a black cannonball of fur. Kalen. He had dispatched his 3 opponents and was now at my side. He stood over me, shielding me with his body, and faced the remaining rogues with a low, terrifying growl that promised a slow and painful death. The scarred leader met his gaze for a second, then seemed to recognize utter defeat. With a whimper, he and his remaining pack turned and fled into the darkness. The clearing fell silent, save for the sound of the river and our own heavy breathing. Kalen turned to me, nudging me with his nose, his wolf eyes frantic with worry as he checked me for injuries. I had cuts and bruises, but nothing serious. I looked at him, my alpha, my protector, my Kalen, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was finally home. I shifted back, the change smoother this time, less painful. I stood before him, naked and vulnerable in the moonlight. He shifted as well, his pained, human eyes full of a love so profound it made my heart ache. He didn't try to speak. He didn't need to. He simply stepped forward and pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly against his warm, strong body. He buried his face in my hair, and I felt a shudder rack his frame. He had broken a decade of silence for me. He had fought for me. In his world, in any world, these were the only words that mattered. I was his, and he was mine. The claim had been made, not with a formal declaration, but in blood and battle and a single shouted name that had bridged an impossible silence. We returned to the pack house not as an alpha and his human secret, but as a mated pair. The news of my transformation, of the rogue attack, of Kalen speaking my name, had already spread like wildfire. The pack gathered in the main hall, their faces a mixture of shock, disbelief, and awe. Rise, the stern second-in-command who had threatened me, was the first to approach. He looked from me to Kalen, his gaze lingering on the way Kalen's arm was possessively wrapped around my waist, his hand resting on the silvery crescent moon mark on my wrist, which now glowed with a soft, steady light. "Alpha," Rise said, his voice full of a respect I hadn't heard before. He then turned to me and bowed his head slightly. "Luna." The title sent a jolt through me. Luna, his mate, the pack's mother. It was a role I could never have imagined, but as I looked at Kalen's proud, loving face, I felt a sense of rightness. One by one, the other pack members followed Riss's lead, bowing their heads in acceptance. There were no more whispers of abomination. They saw the strength of our bond, a bond blessed by the moon goddess herself, a bond that had given their alpha back his voice, if only for a moment. Our life together was built on a new kind of language. Kalen rarely spoke. The effort was still a great strain. The words still a painful memory of his past trauma. He saved them for moments that truly mattered, whispering my name in the dark of night, a low murmur of comfort when I had a nightmare. But we didn't need words. He learned to trace sentences on my palm with his calloused finger. We communicated through the mate bond, sharing feelings and simple thoughts across a room. A squeeze of the hand, a shared look, a gentle touch. These became our vocabulary. His silence was no longer a prison, but a quiet space where our love could grow, undisturbed by the noise of the world. I learned about my own heritage. I was a descendant of the Silver Moon Pack, a bloodline thought to have been wiped out generations ago, known for their healing abilities and their deep connection to the goddess. My dormant genes had been awakened by the proximity to my true mate. I was not just a wolf. I was a missing piece of their world's history. Tonight, we sit on the porch of our cottage, watching the full moon rise, a perfect silver disk in the ink-black sky. The world is quiet, peaceful. My head rests on his shoulder, his arm a familiar, comforting weight around me. He takes my hand and begins to trace on my palm. You are my voice. I smile, my heart full. I turn my head and press a kiss to his jaw. I don't need to answer. He can feel my love, my contentment, my absolute certainty through the bond that hums between us. He is the storm and the pine, the silence and the roar, the broken alpha who was never truly broken at all. And I am the starved outcast who collapsed in a market, only to be carried home to a place I never knew I was searching for. Together, in our quiet world, we have everything.